think when you are bereaved at a very young age, anytime really, but particularly at a young age, I can resonate closely to that.
There are moments in the life of a monarchy that appear, on the surface, to be simple administrative transfers. A document signed, a title passed, an estate quietly changing hands within the same family. And yet beneath that polished surface, beneath the ceremonial language and the official announcements, something far more consequential is sometimes taking place. A repositioning of power, a declaration of intent, a message sent not through words but through deeds, through land, through the weight of acres and inheritance that stretches back centuries. The transfer of Sandringham Estate to Prince William was one of those moments. To the outside world, it looked like a natural progression, a king inheriting his mother's beloved private home, and then, in an act of profound generational continuity, passing it to his son. Clean, orderly, almost sentimental. But those who understand how the British royal institution actually functions, those who know the quiet architecture of power that underpins every title, every bequest, every carefully worded legal arrangement, saw something else entirely. They saw a consolidation, a signal. And if you happened to be connected to a certain family who had hoped the winds might blow differently, they saw a door closing firmly and irrevocably shut. To understand why this transfer matters and why it ignited the kind of resentment that certain circles have tried to keep carefully contained, you have to go back. Not just to the reign of King Charles III, and not just to the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. You have to go back to the origins of Sandringham itself, to what it represents, to why a private estate in Norfolk carries a weight that no square footage or market valuation could ever fully capture. Sandringham House sits on approximately 20,000 acres of Norfolk countryside. It is not a crown estate. This distinction is critical. Unlike Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle, which belong to the nation and are managed by the Crown Estate on behalf of the public, Sandringham is private. It was purchased in 1863 for the then Prince of Wales, the future King Edward VII, using funds from the Duchy of Cornwall. From that moment forward, it passed from sovereign to sovereign not as part of any constitutional arrangement, but as a personal inheritance. A private family home. The kind of place where monarchs could exist, if only briefly, outside the relentless formality of official royal life. Queen Victoria gave it to her son. Edward VII died there. George V died there. King George VI, the current king's grandfather, died there in 1952, with his daughter and future Queen Elizabeth away in Kenya when the news reached her. For over a century and a half, Sandringham has been a place of private joy and private grief for the House of Windsor. It is where the royal family traditionally spends Christmas. It is where Queen Elizabeth II spent the final years of her life in increasing quiet and contentment, and it is where she died on the 8th of September 2022, in the bedroom of Wood Farm Cottage on the estate, with the world unaware until the announcement came. When she died, Sandringham passed immediately and automatically to King Charles III. Along with Balmoral Castle in Scotland, it was one of two great private estates that the late Queen left to her son as part of her personal estate. The financial value of these properties was estimated by various analysts to be in the hundreds of millions of pounds, though precise figures are difficult to confirm given the private nature of the inheritance. What is beyond dispute is that these were among the most symbolically and emotionally significant pieces of property in the entire country. King Charles inherited both estates, and then, in a move that was noted with careful attention by those closest to the royal family, he began to make decisions about their future. Balmoral, the Scottish Highland estate beloved by Queen Victoria and every sovereign since, remained with the king. But Sandringham, the Norfolk estate, the English heartland of royal private life, was transferred to Prince William. The announcement was made without particular fanfare, framed in the language of estate management and long-term planning, and yet it was anything but routine. To understand why, you need to understand the position of William, Prince of Wales, within the current architecture of royal power. William is not merely the heir apparent, he is the figure around whom the future of the monarchy is being deliberately constructed. From the moment his father became king, there has been a consistent pattern of decisions, appointments, and inheritances that have served to strengthen William's position, consolidate his resources, and ensure that when the time comes for him to reign, he will do so from a position of extraordinary institutional and financial security. The Duchy of Cornwall, which generates tens of millions of pounds annually from its vast property portfolio across England and Wales, passed automatically to William upon his father's accession. The Prince of Wales title followed. Kensington Palace as the primary London residence was confirmed, and now Sandringham, a working estate of 20,000 acres with farms, cottages, a stud farm, and one of the most famous pheasant shoots in the country, has been added to his portfolio. This is a deliberate, methodical, and quite remarkable accumulation of assets, influence, and symbolic power. by the time William becomes King William V, he will inherit from his father not merely a throne, but an institutional infrastructure of staggering magnitude. And this is precisely where the other side of this story begins. The Parker Bowles family, the relatives of Queen Camilla, had been watching these developments with a mixture of hope, expectation, and ultimately, according to sources who have spoken with various royal commentators, something approaching fury. To understand their perspective, you need to understand how the arrival of Camilla in the royal family was perceived by some within her own family circle. There were those who saw her marriage to King Charles in 2005 not merely as a personal love story, remarkable and complicated as that story was, but as an entry point, a doorway into the most exclusive institutional structure in the country. A connection, however indirect, to the kind of wealth, property, and prestige that most families could only imagine. Camilla's family, the Shand family, and those connected to them through the Parker Bowles line occupy a particular position in the British upper class. They are not without privilege or connection, but there is a vast difference between the comfortable world of the minor aristocracy and the landed gentry, and the world of Sandringham, the Duchy of Cornwall, and the full weight of royal institutional power. That difference had, for some, begun to feel bridgeable, adjacent, perhaps even accessible in some form, through the right relationships and the right decisions. The expectation, never publicly stated but reportedly circulating in private conversations and social gatherings, was that the king's deep and genuine love for Camilla might translate into a certain generosity toward the family she brought with her. Not an inappropriate generosity, not a formal transfer of royal assets, but perhaps a long-term tenancy on a property within the Sandringham estate, perhaps a symbolic gesture of inclusion, something that would mark the Parker Bowles connection to the royal family as more than merely a marriage certificate. Instead, what happened was something that made that expectation feel not merely unfulfilled, but actively foreclosed. When Sandringham transferred to William, it did not merely pass from one generation to the next. It passed to a generation that has, by all accounts and observable evidence, little warmth for the idea of Camilla's family having any particular foothold within royal life. William's feelings about his father's second marriage have been well documented, at least in their broad emotional contours. The years following Diana's death, the long campaign to legitimize Camilla's role, the eventual marriage, the eventual title of queen consort and then queen, all of it was navigated against a backdrop of complexity and pain that left marks that have never fully faded. William's relationship with Camilla herself has evolved over time. By most accounts, a working relationship of mutual respect has been established, perhaps even something warmer than that. But his relationship with Camilla's family, with the extended network of Parker Bowles connections, with the idea that her marriage to his father might create new claimants on the resources and spaces of royal life, is reportedly quite different. Sandringham under William's ownership is Sandringham administered by a man who has very clear ideas about who belongs in his world and who does not. Any informal arrangements, any quiet understandings, any sense that proximity to the queen might translate into proximity to the estate would have been contingent on the goodwill of whoever owned the property. And now that ownership has a name, and that name is William, but the story does not end there, because to focus only on the personal and family dynamics is to miss the larger institutional logic that is playing out here, a logic that has implications not just for the Parker Bowles family, but for the entire future of the monarchy. What King Charles has done in transferring Sandringham to William is something quite deliberate in terms of royal estate management strategy. For generations, there was a pattern, not a rule, but a pattern in which major private royal properties remained with the sovereign during their lifetime, and then passed to the next. Sovereign upon death. What Charles has done instead is begin the handover during his lifetime, creating what amounts to a living transfer of institutional infrastructure from one generation to the next. This has several effects. It gives William time to become familiar with the management of Sandringham, its farms, its staff, its commercial operations, its community relationships, before he bears the full weight of the crown. It signals to the institution and to the public that the transition, when it comes, will be managed and prepared rather than abrupt. And it removes any ambiguity about who controls what. There is no period of uncertainty, no gap between reigns during which competing claims or expectations might crystallize. The decision is made, the transfer is done. In doing this, Charles has also done something else. He has made a statement about legacy and about what he values most in terms of the monarchy's future. Sandringham is not being kept as a personal possession for the king to enjoy in his remaining years. It is being passed forward, invested in the next generation, entrusted to the hands that will carry the institution into the second half of the 21st century. This is in many ways a deeply selfless act, a king choosing the future over the present. a father choosing his son's security over his own comfort, and it is precisely this quality of the decision that makes any resentment directed at it seem so particularly futile. How do you argue against a father giving his son a gift? How do you position your own expectations as legitimate when set against the straightforward logic of dynastic succession? The answer, of course, is that you cannot, and that inability, that structural impossibility of mounting any credible public objection, is perhaps the sharpest edge of the whole situation for those who find themselves on the wrong side of it. There is something else worth examining here. Sandringham is not merely a historic house and a country estate. It is a working enterprise. The farms produce food. The stud farm breeds horses. There are holiday cottages that generate rental income. There are shooting rights and forestry operations and a whole economy of rural life that spins around the estate and supports hundreds of local families and businesses in Norfolk. Ownership of Sandringham is not a passive, ceremonial thing. It is active, managerial, consequential, and very practical terms for a large number of people who have nothing to do with royal family politics. When William becomes the owner of Sandringham, he becomes the landlord, the employer, the decision maker for all of that activity. He inherits not just the prestige, but the responsibility. The cottages on the estate, some of which have historically been made available to family members and trusted associates of the royal household, are now his to allocate or withhold as he sees fit. The terms of any informal arrangements that may have existed under previous ownership do not automatically carry over. A new owner brings new priorities. For anyone who had built any plans, however tentative or speculative, around the idea of a connection to Sandringham through the Camilla relationship, this is a reckoning. The ground that seemed potentially available has been claimed, and the person who has claimed it has made no suggestion that he sees any particular reason to extend invitations that were never formally offered in the first place. Royal history is full of these moments when the machinery of inheritance, legal and precise and indifferent to personal feeling, produces outcomes that leave some people standing in the cold. The Windsors themselves were not always called the Windsors. The name was changed during the First World War to distance the family from its German origins. The Duke of Windsor, Edward VIII, who abdicated in 1936, spent decades in a kind of gilded exile, the institution having moved on without him and made clear that sentiment had its limits. Even Princess Margaret, the Queen's own sister, spent much of her life navigating the tension between what she was by birth and what the institution was prepared to offer her in practice. The gap between proximity to the throne and actual institutional belonging has always been wide, and the people who learn this lesson most painfully are often those who confused access for inclusion, who mistook warmth for guarantee, who believed that love, even royal love, rewrites the rules of succession and inheritance. What William's ownership of Sandringham represents in its most fundamental form is the reassertion of those rules. The rules that say royal property follows royal bloodlines. The rules that say the heir to the throne consolidates rather than disperses the assets of the crown. The rules that have governed the private wealth of the British monarchy for centuries, and that no marriage, however significant, can ultimately override. For the monarchy as an institution, this is actually a story of stability and coherence. The chain of custody is unbroken. The estate passes from queen to king to prince in a line of direct descent that the institution recognizes and the public can understand. Whatever private disappointments it may have caused, the transfer of Sandringham to William is, constitutionally and institutionally, exactly what it should be. The longer question, the one that will only be answered across decades, is what kind of monarch William will be. The estates he now accumulates, the power he consolidates, the decisions he makes about how to manage Sandringham and the Duchy of Cornwall, and all the other instruments of royal wealth, will tell us something about the kind of kingship he is preparing to exercise. Will it be open or closed? Expansive or protective? Will he use the platform of royal ownership to broaden the sense of who belongs to this institution, or will he draw the circle tight around those he trusts? History suggests that every monarch answers these questions differently, and history also suggests that the answers matter enormously, not just for the families immediately affected by them, but for the relationship between the monarchy and the country it represents. Sandringham sits in Norfolk, surrounded by flat lands and wide skies and the kind of English countryside that has remained essentially unchanged for generations. Its house has seen the births and deaths and Christmas mornings of royals going back over 160 years. The pheasants still fly over the same fields. The deer still move through the same woodland. The farms still produce their harvests on the same rhythms they always have. And now it belongs to William, completely, irrevocably, with all the history it carries and all the future it represents. The families who hoped for a different outcome will have to find their accommodation with that reality. The institution has spoken, as it always does, not in words but in deeds, not in sentiment but in property, Not in the language of feeling, but in the language of ownership, which is the oldest and most unambiguous language that power has ever known. And somewhere in the quiet Norfolk landscape, in the long sight lines across the Sandringham grounds, the shape of the next reign is already beginning to take form.